Yo, what's up guys, it's Schizomaniacal here. So with recent events in Black Clover, I honestly wanted to talk about a few things with Black Clover, but the first video I really wanted to talk about is, as of recently, I've been really enjoying Black Clover. And when I say really enjoying Black Clover, I mean like more than My Hero Academia. And some of you might think, oh, this is another clickbait video, you're trying to start some shit. But I want to talk about it and analyze it, because remember, Black Clover gets a lot of shit from the fandom, and it will probably always get a lot of shit. It's one of those series. It's pretty much what Bleach, the previous representation would be like Bleach. Bleach got a lot of shit. The difference is that Bleach, it's only started getting that shit later on in its manga, whereas Black Clover gets it from Jump. Ha! Get it? It's Shonen Jump. Ha! So I did want to kind of compare and contrast the two, maybe see if anyone feels the same way as I feel about Black Clover and why you've been enjoying it more than My Hero as of lately, if you read both, or why you enjoy it in general. Because there's a few things about it that I think Black Clover does better than My Hero, or at the very least, because I think really what it boils down to is it's not that Black Clover is just inherently better than My Hero. I think Black Clover is more consistent than My Hero is. In a few ways. So the first thing I want to talk about is probably the main characters, Asta and Deku, where I think Asta embodies the premise of his show to a T, almost to the point where it can get on a person's nerves. Deku, I feel like, contradicts it too damn much for you to enjoy it. They both start off as they're powerless losers, right? Like, Asta has no magic, Deku has no quirk. And the premise of like the first chapter of chapters is that in Deku's case, All Might's like, listen, I told you couldn't be a hero because you don't have the power to become a hero, because you don't have a quirk. And then over the course of the first chapter or so, what I realized is that power has nothing to do with it. A mark of a good hero is a person who's willing to jump in the face of danger to save the life of another person. Like, Deku has a strong sense of justice. Same thing with Asta, where Asta's premise is more so that hard work can pay off versus overwhelming talent. Asta being a person born with no magic, he's essentially screwed from the get-go because he can't do shit in a world where magic is literally everything. Even the poorest of poor have magic and can do basic shit, and Asta can't even do that. But all that training and work he put in over the years to prepare his body, quote-unquote, if he ever got magic, pays off when he finally gets a grimoire that happens to be a heavy-ass sword where he can use to hit people with anti-magic. So even though they both end up getting powers, I think the whole Deku getting All Might's power kind of contradicts the premise of the first fucking chapter, whereas I think Asta getting the anti-magic sword is the Demon Dweller and the Demon Slayer sword eventually. Those complement his hard work, because those swords shown later in the manga are heavy as fuck. So the hard work he put in to train all those years before he even got those swords wasn't wasted. They're half of the reason why he doesn't start off just weak as fuck, because having a sword that does anti-magic doesn't mean anything, that can negate anti-magic doesn't mean anything if you can't pick up the fucking sword. I feel like that compliments Asta, whereas I think, oh yeah, by the way, All Might's gonna give you a fucking piece of I think it was hair or nose hair. You gotta eat it, and now you get a quirk. Well, but the whole thing about Deku that was relatable from the get-go was the fact that you didn't have a quirk, but you still wanted to be a hero. To me, that's way more interesting. It's almost kind of like, I feel like Deku's situation is like Naruto's situation, so they retconned it earlier in My Hero than they did in Naruto. Where Naruto was like, the reason why people don't like you is because you have poor chakra control and you have a demon inside you, which probably has something to do with it. And then you find out, oh, well, the Uzumaki clan was all this and that. Your father was the fourth Hokage. You were born from greatness. There you go. Whereas in Deku's, it's like, I'm just going to give you the power now, so we're going to kind of not pay attention to that shit. The other part of My Hero that I think is inconsistent is kind of the main character's interaction with the world at large. This has started bothering me a lot as of recently, because all things considered, I think My Hero has a lot more, especially with its villains, has a lot better setup of the world that they live in and their society, whereas Black Clover, although having it, I don't think it does it as well because I think Black Clover's villains are overall weaker than My Hero's villains. That's the reason why Stain is so fucking cool and is one of the better villains in the series, because even though he's a small villain in the grand scheme of like the arcs that have gone on, his influence meant way more. Like how whether or not the whole pillar of justice thing that All Might served for a while, whether or not that was a good idea, and what was the pros and cons to having that be the basis of the justice system in this superhero society, and how Shigaraki resents and hates it due to his own past, and how, oh, you're the guy who claims to be the greatest hero, but you still weren't saving people. Where are all these villains coming from? They're coming from your era, All Might. These are things that are interesting as hell. What aggravates me is that they never have Deku really face that. And this far into the manga, that I find that a little ridiculous. Whereas you have a character like Asta who is directly facing the issues of his society, of whether or not the poor should be put that low down. Even the ones who work their asses off to stand on the same pillar as you and do the same things as you. Because even when we're on the same good side, you're still tripping me the fuck up. Asta at least addresses that even in subtle ways. There's a reason why I would relate Deku to kind of like Naruto, whereas I correlate Asta to like Luffy in a lot of ways. Where Luffy wasn't overly concerned about every little thing, I think Asta's technically more concerned than Luffy is because of how what Asta's goal is. But Asta also is pretty much like Luffy in the sense that they're both stupid, but have their moments of like smart shit to say. One of the interesting, that he shows progression in these fights in arcs in the manga. For example, when they fought Veto, which is probably their first really hard fight, Veto was talking a bunch of despair bullshit. Once again, not an interesting villain, and Asta couldn't really beat him on his own or stop him or any of that. Like Yami and Vanessa and Finro are the reasons why they were able to take his ass down. So of course in the next arc, when they run across another one of these top 3 dudes from the Eyes of the Midnight Sun, Fauna, one of the first things he does in the fight is he puts his sword down and he's like, listen, why can't we have a talk? Your friend was talking a bunch of despair, you're talking a bunch of hatred. Why can't you at least tell us why you hate us, and why can't we have a conversation? That shit that you would do as the future Wizard King. Not just go in there and beat somebody's ass, but the first thing that should come to your mind is, can we not come to a civil conversation and talk about it? He does this again with Raya, where he's like, I have no interest in killing them. My goal is to like, listen, they're doing exactly what I'm doing. They're fighting for someone they care about and the people they care about, and that's the same thing I'm doing. These are moments Astas has that Deku doesn't. And it pisses me off because Deku fights villains who challenge his morality way more than fucking Astas. Like I said, Fauna and Veto are both one-note villains, but got better progression out of Asta than Deku. Deku recently in the manga was fighting Overhaul and Gentleman, characters who constantly would have made him question his morality and the society he lives in, and whether what All Might was doing when he was on top, whether it was the smart thing to do. Deku never questions any of that in the manga, so it comes off jarring as shit. It's always this whole, like, the Overhaul fight to me was annoying as hell because I think Overhaul is a really good villain who was downplayed at the end of his arc for bullshit. I don't really have an issue with the Shigaraki and Overhaul stuff at the very end of the arc. I have more of an issue with the Deku Eri versus Overhaul fight at the very fucking end. Plus, and that's not just the stuff that involves them, Horikoshi not using the girls of that arc very well, but also just that interaction where Deku and Overhaul, like Overhaul's talking about society and resetting everything back to zero. Although he's doing it for the sake of the Mafia, the idea is still a valid idea. That's why he keeps calling everyone sick with all these fucking quirks and shit. He wants to reset everything back to zero. He wants everybody to just be a normal human. That's the whole point of these fucking drugs. And Deku never really questions that part of the conversation. His whole thing is that, well, if I can't save even one little girl, I can't call myself a hero. Or this whole thing with him and Night Eye about changing the future on some Neji shit. That's what it reminded me a lot of. And I'm like, why don't you address the argument about whether or not having quirks in this world is a good thing. Everyone has a fucking superpower. They never even address some of the more basic questions that as a reader you would ask. For example, if everybody has a quirk and you have the superhero system, doesn't that mean when these innocent people who aren't heroes are getting attacked, they technically have abilities that could potentially save themselves? Like, these are things that should be already being brought up because they're so obvious in the manga. Even if you don't do full arcs about them, I would like the ideas to be brought up and to have the conversation. Deku doesn't do that. And then we get into the inconsistency when it comes to his fights. It's obvious that they portray Deku as the analytical fighter. He's the kind of guy who thinks out his plans. That's one of the reasons why he struggles in very, like, one-off hand-to-hand fights. The problem I have is that it's still a shonen manga, so we can't have a strategy character be the main character. So what did they do to Deku? Well, they made Deku overly fucking emotional, which still gets him into the same trouble that any other Shonen Jump hero gets into, which is that he's very prone to getting into very quick fights with really no setup to it. The problem is, I think that contradicts part of his character, because in a lot of his fights, a good chunk of his fights, they're all like emotion driven, because that's how My Hero sells its fights. Whereas I think Black Clover has better strategy, fight-wise. And I think Black Clover has better fights. Hence why I tend to enjoy Black Clover's fights more than My Hero's. Because when you break down a My Hero and you take the emotional weight out of it, they're not interesting as fights. That's one of the reasons why I've heard people say that One for All versus All Might. Is it One for All? No, All for One. All for One? I think it's All for One versus All Might. Isn't that interesting in the fight? But yeah, because as a fight, it's pretty weak. Morally, it's the whole emotional backdrop that gives it its relevance. Whereas I think Naruto was always good about striking a balance in between. I think My Hero has always been kind of lopsided, where I think the emotional moments outweighs the actual enjoyment of the fight. The only thing that sells it in the anime is because it's animated very, very, very fucking well, and that's what I think saves the anime a lot. But I think the fights themselves are weak. But just to give you some examples, we have Deku, the analytical fighter, fighting Muscular, and literally it just boils down to emotional power-ups. He pushed beyond his limits, and he was able to beat Muscular. That's literally the idea of the fight. Even his fight against Todoroki, which he had time to prepare for, boiled down to him breaking his fingers individually to stop the flow of ice, and then eventually just swinging and breaking his own fucking arm to prevent himself from getting frozen, and then ended with a giant fucking clash of a strong fist and fire. But the reason why that fight does so well isn't because of the fight itself, it's because of the emotional backdrop of essentially Deku helping Todoroki become his own fucking person. But to me in Black Clover, I don't have to deal with that shit. Because although we have emotional moments, the fights are still good. I don't want to spoil all the fights in Black Clover, but especially in this recent arc, we've been just getting consistently good fights. Like, for example, Ghost, Grey, Gordon, and Henry versus Sally, Rados, and Valtos, I think is a really good fight. I think the Vanessa, Magna, Asta versus Possessed Luck is a really good fucking fight. Because it has a bunch of strategy in it, but it also has the emotional moment at the end of the fight with Luck and Magna. You can have both, but it'd still be a really good fight. That's the kind of shit I dig. I mean, and that's part of the reason why I've been enjoying Black Clover more. Because although Black Clover fights aren't like the most technical, they're way more fucking technical than goddamn My Hero. And like I said, it doesn't contradict the way these characters fight. Asta is very straightforward. Because he uses swords and ki, I guess. Whereas Ass is supposed to be the strategical fighter, and half of his fights, he's just getting overly emotional and throwing punches and kicks and shit. Like, he has a few fights where he does, like, base level analytics. Remember the book of hero information he had that gets essentially thrown the fuck out? He has, like, a few moments that are, like, strategic based, like the whole him, Mineta, and Suyu versus the dudes in the training area, where he had the smart idea is to make a hole in the ground, hole in the water to create like a whirlpool. Mineta threw his sticky balls or his great balls to stick all the villains together, and eventually when the whirlpool stopped, it shut up like a geyser and stuck all the villains together. That's a cool strategic moment. Then right afterwards, Shigaraki's about to fucking put his hands on Sue, and Deku's immediate response is, "Oh, I'm just gonna throw this punch and hope to God it works." Like, it aggravates me. Now, some people would say because of the immediateness of the situation, that shouldn't matter. But the point is, that's not the only time he does it. Deku fluctuates a lot between being overly strategical and then just throwing fucking hands. Why? Because let's make our analytical character overly emotional to still get him to do the same thing that most Shonen Jump heroes do. But there's nothing wrong with having him be analytical. So to me, it ends up coming off as a contradiction and more of a negative because most of his fights are way more emotional driven than strategy driven. And that's a fucking problem. Even the overhaul fight essentially just boils down to a power struggle. And I'm like, damn it, aren't you supposed to be the strategical fighter? There's like minor, and he does like base level strategics. And I'm like, come the fuck on. Come the fuck on. Even the whole Class A versus Class B fights recently. His fight doesn't have a lot of strategy in it because we had to do all for one stuff. And I'm just like, and these are just things that have irked me. I think Black Clover is just more consistent in its themes than I think My Hero is. And it reflects in various parts of the manga and anime because of it. Because, like I said, I think that My Hero does a great job developing its villains. Way more than Black Clover does. But Black Clover is more consistent with its main character, which is kind of the main draw to the series and its themes. And that's my issue. That's my personal issue. But I'm curious what people think in the comment section below. I'm probably going to get a lot of shit in the comments. That's perfectly fine. Currently, I've been enjoying Black Clover more than My Hero. I'm not saying My Hero's been bad, but My Hero just hasn't been overly interesting. Because they're still trying to hold Deku into the school setting and not have his mind really branch out to the other aspects of society, which as a hero he would need to be involved with anyway in the future. That shit bugs me. So it's like, why is that being separated? Whereas Asta has to deal with the reality of if you want to become Wizard King, that's what you're going to have to deal with the issues of society. Same thing with Deku. If you're going to become the #1 hero, you also have to deal with the issues of society and make sure that your actions are the best actions that should be taken. Learn from your predecessor. Not saying they won't ever get to it, but God, they're taking their sweet ass time with something that to me it's pretty fucking important. That's a whole nother thing. The whole Deku and all my interactions is way different than like Deku and the Wizard King. So, not Deku, Asta and the Wizard King versus like All Might and Deku. So, there's a lot of other aspects I can talk about, but I will give Black Clover one thing, and it definitely has better fights. Overall, I think it has better fights. Even including the emotional moments, I still think Black Clover has better fights. But I think My Hero has better villains. I don't know. But leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. This has been your boy Schizomanic. Remember, you're not having any fun if you don't just go a little bit crazy. Sometimes you gotta do like the subtle things. It's the subtle moments that sell you on these characters. Or my character. I don't fucking know. Anyways, I gotta go. Peace. Time to go to the gym and break my legs. Break my legs. Hey, I'm pulling a Deku. I'm gonna break my legs. And then the day after, I'll break my arms and I'll be just like Asta. See? It all comes together. Alright, peace guys.